The grand palace of the Arcan Empire stood tall against the glowing sky of their world. Its towers reached upward, made of shining crystal that reflected the colors of the twin suns. The walls were carved with patterns of ancient victories, and the halls inside were filled with noble families dressed in fine robes. Every visitor could see at once that this was the heart of a proud empire, a place where power and tradition ruled. On this day, the palace was filled with more than nobles. Soldiers from Earth stood in rows near the center hall. They wore heavy armor made of human steel, polished until it shone under the bright lights. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, and their movements were stiff but disciplined. They had been invited as part of the truce agreement between Earth and the Arcan Empire. For years, the two powers had fought across the stars, but now peace talks had forced them into the same room. Among the crowd stood Mira, the 19-year-old princess of the Arcans. She was young compared to many in the court, yet her words carried weight. Her eyes were sharp, and her voice carried confidence that many of the older nobles envied. She looked upon the human soldiers with little respect. To her, they were creatures of flesh who had survived wars only because of the machines they built. Without their armor, she believed, they would crumble against even the weakest enemy. She stood on the steps of the throne and raised her voice so that all could hear. These humans call themselves warriors. Yet look at them. They hide behind iron shells. If they removed their armor, what would remain? A weak body, fragile and soft. How can such creatures claim to stand equal with us? The hall filled with laughter. Alien nobles clapped their hands and nodded. The words of the young princess carried the sting of insult, and many found it amusing. The human soldiers stood still, not moving an inch. Their discipline was unbroken, but behind their helmets many eyes burned with quiet anger. Among them was a soldier named Aaron. He was not the tallest nor the strongest of his group. His armor bore scratches from past battles, but his stance was steady. He had heard insults before, yet the mocking laughter of the court pressed against him harder than any enemy strike. Still, his face showed no anger. He did not raise his voice or argue. Instead, he slowly reached up and removed his helmet. The hall grew quiet. For the first time, the aliens saw the human's face. It was not filled with rage nor with shame. It was calm, almost too calm for a soldier who had just been ridiculed in front of a foreign court. His short hair was damp with sweat, his skin pale under the lights, but his eyes were steady. Aaron began to unfasten the locks on his armor. One by one, the plates of steel fell to the ground with heavy sounds that echoed in the hall. First the chest plate, then the arm guards, then the heavy boots. Every piece he removed made the silence grow deeper. The nobles no longer laughed. Even Mira watched with surprise, her earlier confidence shaken. When the last piece of armor rested on the floor, Aaron stood in plain uniform, nothing to protect him but simple fabric. His body showed marks of scars from battles past, proof that he had not always been behind a steel wall. Without a word, he turned his back on the throne and walked away. His steps were steady and slow, but there was no weakness in them. The nobles did not know how to respond. Some whispered that it was shame. Others wondered if it was defiance. Mira herself felt a sharp unease in her chest. She had expected anger or perhaps fear. She had not expected silence and calm retreat. For a moment, she could not tell if she had won the exchange or if she had been challenged in a way she did not understand. Aaron reached the great doors of the hall. Without looking back, he pushed them open and walked into the light of the twin suns. The sound of the doors closing echoed through the palace like a drum of finality. The soldiers of Earth did not move. They stood firm, following their training, but their hearts beat with pride at what their comrade had done. The Emperor of the Arcans, who had sat silent during the exchange, leaned slightly forward. His old eyes followed the path of the human soldier who had just left. He said nothing, but his mind was stirred. Few dared to walk away from the throne, yet this human had done so without fear. Mira forced herself to smile as if she still held control. She raised her chin and said lightly, "See how they flee when challenged." Yet her voice did not carry the same strength as before. Deep within, she felt a question forming. Why had he walked away with such calm? Why had he not defended himself with words? Why had he left behind the armor that she thought was their only strength? Outside the palace, Aaron walked through the busy streets of the capital. The people, both human settlers and alien citizens, moved about their lives. Many stared as he passed, some with confusion, others with quiet respect. A soldier without armor was an unusual sight. To the common people, armor meant safety and power. To see a man walking alone with nothing but scars was something different, something that stirred whispers. Aaron did not stop to explain himself. He walked until he reached the edge of the city where the ruins of war still lay. Houses had been shattered, walls broken, and families left homeless. The truce had ended battles, but it had not repaired the damage. Here he bent down and began to lift stones, clearing paths, helping people build shelters from the wreckage. Children watched him with wide eyes, and elders offered quiet thanks. He did not need armor for this work, nor weapons, only strength and patience. Back in the palace, Mira could not stop thinking about what she had seen. She walked to the balcony that overlooked the city. In the distance, she thought she saw the figure of the human soldier, moving stones among the ruins. Her chest felt tight. She told herself it was foolish to think about him, but the memory of his calm eyes returned again and again. That night, the nobles gathered for a feast. They spoke of trade, politics, and the long war that had nearly destroyed both sides. Yet in every corner, whispers of the human soldier's actions spread. Some said he had shamed his people. Others claimed he had shown strength beyond pride. The meaning was debated, but no one could deny that the image of the unarmored soldier walking away had burned itself into the mind of the court. Mira sat quietly at the feast, her plate untouched. She felt as if her words from earlier had turned against her. She had mocked a man for relying on armor, yet he had cast it aside as if it meant nothing. His scars had told a story without a single word. She felt restless, unable to laugh with the others. In that moment, the story of a human soldier began to grow. It spread from the palace halls to the streets, from the streets to the markets, and from the markets to the villages. People repeated it with their own details, some true and some imagined. To many, it became a tale of defiance, a reminder that humans were not what the Archons believed them to be. And so the seed was planted. A seed of doubt in the heart of a princess, and a seed of respect in the hearts of those who witnessed or heard the story. The act of one soldier, silent and calm, had begun to change the way an empire looked upon humanity. The night sky of the alien world glittered with countless stars. Among them, Earth's sun was just a small light. But in the halls of the Arcan Empire, the presence of humans had grown larger than before. Mira gazed upward, her thoughts unsettled. She had ridiculed a soldier to display her own pride. Yet now she could not shake the feeling that she had been the one tested and found lacking. The story of Iran walking away from the throne had only just begun, but already it was shaping the path of peace, war, and the fragile bond between two races. The princess did not yet know how much her world would change because of that single moment. The capital city of the Arcan Empire had always been a place of glittering towers and proud traditions, but after decades of war, its brightness had faded. Entire districts bore the marks of conflict. Walls were cracked, streets damaged, and families displaced. The truce had stopped the fighting, yet it had not removed the scars that the war had left. In these ruins, a quiet figure now worked each day, far from the eyes of commanders and far from the halls of the palace. Iran, the human soldier who had removed his armor in front of the court, had chosen not to return to the barracks. Instead, he went to the broken neighborhoods on the city's edge. His comrades thought he was strange, but they did not question his choice. They had seen the silence in his eyes when he left the palace, and they knew he followed a path of his own. Each morning, Aaron rose with the suns and walked to the rubble fields where families struggled to build shelters. He lifted stones, repaired walls, carried supplies, and tended to the injured when he could. Without his armor, he looked no different from a laborer. Yet his endurance set him apart. He did not rest easily nor complain. When others grew tired, he continued with steady steps. Children began to follow him, curious at first, then trusting. They called him the Unarmored One, a name that spread quickly among the common people. At first, the Archons were wary of his presence. Many still held distrust for humans, and many had lost loved ones in battles against them. Yet Aaron never raised his voice, never boasted, never showed arrogance. His actions spoke for him. When a roof beam fell during construction, he lifted it from the ground alone. When a child cried from hunger, he gave away his own food without hesitation. Slowly, the walls of suspicion began to crumble. The people who had once looked at him with doubt now greeted him with quiet respect. Back in the palace, the Princess Mira struggled with restless thoughts. She had mocked the human soldier before the entire court. She had called him weak, believing his kind could not survive without armor. Yet now she heard whispers spreading through the city. The very man she had ridiculed was living among the people, working with bare hands, showing strength in ways her own guards did not. During a council session, she overheard servants speaking of Aaron. One said he had carried water for a whole district during a drought. Another claimed he had fought off a beast that threatened a group of children. Mira dismissed the words at first, but each new rumor made her feel uneasy. If even a part of them were true, then her judgment of him had been wrong. One evening, curiosity overcame her pride. She left the palace in plain clothes, hiding her identity, and walked through the busy streets. Her guards protested, but she insisted on going alone, claiming she wished to see the state of her city without escort. She blended into the crowd and followed the voices that spoke of the human soldier. She found him near the ruins of an old market. Families were gathered there, rebuilding stalls. Aaron worked beside them, lifting heavy wooden beams onto his shoulders and placing them with care. His face was covered in dust, his uniform torn from hard labor, but his movements never slowed. He did not order others around. Instead, he joined their effort as if he were one of them. Mira watched from a distance, hidden by the crowd. She saw how the people trusted him. They handed him tools, called his name, and even laughed in his company. Children ran to him, pulling at his hands, and he smiled faintly, though he said little. It was not the image of weakness she had painted in her mind. It was something else, something she had not expected. She remembered her words in the throne hall. She had mocked his kind, claiming that without armor they were nothing. Yet here he was, stripped of all protection, standing taller than ever. He looked vulnerable, yet at the same time he looked unbreakable. Her chest tightened with a strange feeling she could not name. That night when Mira returned to the palace, she sat alone in her chamber. She tried to push away the image of the soldier working with the people, but it stayed with her. She asked herself why it disturbed her so deeply. Was it shame because she had misjudged him, or was it something else, something harder to admit? The next day the court gathered again. Nobles continued to mock the humans in whispers. They spoke of Aaron's departure from the hall as proof of cowardice. Mira listened, but for the first time she did not join them. Instead, she felt a quiet anger rise within her. She wanted to speak in his defense, yet her pride held her tongue. She was not ready to admit her mistake in front of them. Outside the palace, Aaron's days continued without change. He repaired bridges, cleared streets, and shared food with those who had little. The human commanders learned of his actions and at first considered ordering him back to the barracks. Yet when they saw how the common people had grown to respect him, they decided to let him continue. His presence among the Archons was building a new kind of bond, one that no treaty could have created. Mira's father, the Emperor, also heard the rumors. Though he remained silent, his advisors spoke often of the soldier. Some claimed he was trying to win the hearts of the people for Earth. Others said his work was a quiet insult to the Archon throne, as if suggesting the Empire could not care for its own citizens. Yet the Emperor saw something different. He remembered the calm way the soldier had walked out of the hall, leaving behind his armor without fear. Now he saw the results of that choice. Perhaps it was not arrogance, but strength of a different kind. Days turned to weeks, and the story of the unarmored soldier grew. Travelers carried it beyond the city, spreading it to other worlds within the Empire. On distant colonies, people whispered of a human who had faced insult and responded with quiet dignity. His legend grew not through battles or victories, but through patience and resilience. Mira began to visit the city more often, always in disguise. Each time she found Aaron among the people. She never revealed herself, yet she watched carefully. She studied the way he worked, the way he treated others, and the way people gathered around him. Each time she left more unsettled. Her view of humanity was changing, and with it her understanding of strength. One evening a storm swept across the capital. Lightning struck the old districts, and heavy rain collapsed several shelters. Families cried for help as water flooded the streets. Mira rushed to the balcony of her chamber and looked out at the chaos. From the distance she saw a single figure moving through the storm. Aaron carried children in his arms, leading families to higher ground, his steps steady despite the raging wind. He worked for hours until the floodwaters calmed. The next morning the people spoke of him again, louder than before. They called him a protector, not because of armor or weapons, but because of the will he showed when others faltered. Even Mira's own advisors spoke of him with reluctant respect. In the silence of her room, Mira finally admitted to herself that she had been wrong. She had called him weak, but in truth he was stronger than most warriors she had known. She realized that strength was not always measured in armor or weapons, but in the spirit that refused to break. Yet pride still held her back. She could not bring herself to face him, not yet. She could only watch from afar, waiting for the moment when fate would force their paths to cross again. The Empire did not know it, but this quiet bond between princess and soldier was already shaping the future, while nobles argued over politics, while commanders prepared for possible battles. A simple act of labor and compassion was planting seeds of change. And so the unarmored path continued. Aaron walked it without seeking glory, without demanding reward. But each step he took carried weight, and each choice he made was carving a new image of humanity in the heart of an alien empire. The city of the Arkan Empire had grown calmer since the truce began. Trade had started again, markets reopened, and ships moved freely through the sky. Yet peace was fragile. Many groups did not agree with a treaty between humans and Arkans. Some rebel factions believed the Empire had betrayed its honor by allowing humans to stand as equals. Hidden in the shadows, they planned to strike. One hot afternoon, the peace of the city was broken. At first, it was only smoke rising in the distance. Then the sound of explosions echoed across the capital. Shouts spread through the streets as families fled toward safety. Rebel banners appeared on rooftops, their fighters pouring into the heart of the city. They were swift, moving in light armor and carrying weapons designed to pierce heavy suits. The palace guards scrambled to defend the gates, but the rebels struck with speed. They used narrow alleys, hidden tunnels, and sudden strikes. The heavy armored soldiers of the Empire could not keep up. Even the human units stationed near the palace struggled. They had trained for direct battles, not for this kind of attack. Mira was in the council chamber when the alarm sounded. Her advisors rushed to protect her, urging her to hide in the safe chamber below the palace. Yet she could not ignore the cries from the streets. From the high windows she saw flames rising, and she heard the chaos spreading closer. Her heart pounded with fear, but she forced herself to stand tall. Meanwhile, Aaron was far from the palace. He was in the ruined districts once again, helping families build stronger walls for their homes. When the explosions shook the ground, he lifted his head and saw smoke rising. Without hesitation, he left his work and ran toward the danger. Others shouted for him to stay, but he ignored them. The unarmored soldier had no shield, no advanced weapons, but his mind was clear. People were in danger, and he would not stand aside. As he ran, he passed streets filled with panic. Families carried children. Merchants tried to save their goods. Guards shouted orders they could not enforce. Aaron stopped only to help those who stumbled. He lifted a fallen beam to free a trapped child, pushed a cart aside to clear a path, and guided frightened citizens toward safer ground. His uniform became torn, his hands bled, but he never slowed. The rebels reached the central district. They set fires to block the guards and spread fear. They targeted the palace itself, knowing that striking at the royal family would shake the Empire's control. Mira's guards prepared to block the entrance, but they were few, and the rebels pressed harder with each moment. Aaron arrived at the scene as the battle raged. The armored soldiers clashed with rebels, yet their heavy suits slowed them. Aaron had no armor, but this became his strength. He moved quickly through the chaos, striking from angles the rebels did not expect. He picked up dropped weapons, used broken wood as shields, and struck with precision. He did not fight to kill, but to drive back the attackers and protect the civilians caught in the crossfire. From a balcony, Mira watched the fight. She saw armored warriors fall under the rebels' swift attacks, but then her eyes caught sight of a lone figure moving without hesitation. She recognized him at once. Aaron fought without armor, darting through the smoke, pulling wounded guards to safety, shielding families with his own body. She felt her breath catch in her chest. The man she had once mocked was now saving lives in ways her proud soldiers could not. The rebels grew more aggressive, pushing through the broken gates of the palace. Mira's guards fought bravely, but the tide was turning. Mira stood frozen at the top of the stairs, torn between fear and duty. At that moment, Aaron appeared, covered in dust and blood, carrying a wounded child in his arms. He set the child down safely and looked up at the rebels storming the entrance. With nothing but a piece of broken stone in his hand, he charged forward. His movements were not elegant, but they were filled with determination. He struck at the rebels' weapons, disarming one, knocking another down. The palace guards rallied behind him, their courage renewed. Mira watched in awe as the unarmored soldier stood against the tide, his spirit burning brighter than the flames around them. The rebels were surprised. They had expected fear and chaos, but instead they faced a man who refused to yield. Aaron shouted orders to the guards, guiding them to block key passages and protect the civilians trapped inside. Though he was not their commander, his voice carried strength and they obeyed. Under his direction, the defense grew sharper. Hours passed as the battle raged across the city. Rebels struck again and again, but each time Aaron was there, moving swiftly, adapting, never surrendering. His scars burned, his body ached, yet he pressed on. Every time Mira thought he might fall, he rose again, as if fueled by something no weapon could break. When the sun began to set, the rebels withdrew, retreating to the outer districts. The palace stood damaged but unbroken. Fires smoldered and the wounded filled the halls, but the heart of the empire still beat. Aaron stood in the courtyard, his uniform torn nearly to pieces, his body bruised and bloodied, yet his eyes remained steady. Mira descended the stairs, her steps slow but certain. She walked past her guards, past the wounded, until she stood before Aaron. For a long moment she said nothing, only looked at him. She remembered her mocking words from before, and shame burned in her heart. She had called him weak, but she had seen with her own eyes the truth. His strength was not in steel or machines. It was in his will, his spirit, his refusal to yield. At last she spoke, her voice softer than before. "You saved them. You saved us." Aaron did not answer. He only nodded once and turned his gaze back to the ruined gates. For him, the battle was not about glory or recognition. It was about duty, about protecting lives when no one else could. That night, the city whispered again. They spoke not of the rebels nor of the damage, but of the unarmored soldier who had stood when others fell. His name spread from street to street. His story carried on the voices of the survivors. He became a symbol of defiance, of hope, and of a strength that no armor could provide. Mira sat in her chamber long after the fires were put out. She thought of his scars, his steady eyes, and his silent courage. For the first time she felt not only respect but also something deeper, something she could not yet name. She realized that the path of humanity was not what she had believed. They were not fragile creatures hiding behind steel. They were something else, something far more dangerous and inspiring. The trial of fire had ended, but it had left a mark on everyone. On the city scarred by battle, on the people who now carried new respect for the humans, on the princess whose heart had been shaken, and most of all on the soldier, who had proven that true strength was never in armor but in the spirit that refused to break. The palace of the Arkan Empire had survived the rebel attack, but its walls carried new scars. Broken gates, shattered windows, and scorched stones reminded everyone how close destruction had come. The nobles tried to return to their old lives of luxury, but fear lingered in the air. The rebels had not been crushed. They had only withdrawn, waiting for their chance to strike again. In the days that followed, Mira walked the halls with troubled thoughts. Her heart was no longer at ease. Each corner reminded her of that night when fire raged and blades clashed. Each shadow reminded her of the soldier who had stood unarmored in the courtyard, fighting with nothing but will. She could not forget the sight of Aaron shielding the weak, guiding soldiers, and never faltering. Her earlier pride felt hollow, her words of mockery now heavy with regret. Aaron himself did not seek thanks. After the battle, he returned to the city streets once again. His hands were cut, his body bruised, but he worked without pause. He cleared debris from the fires, lifted beams from collapsed homes, and carried the wounded to safer places. To the people, he was no longer just a soldier. He was a protector, one who had proven his worth through action rather than rank. They spoke of him in the markets, praised him in the taverns, and honored him in their homes. His name became a symbol, and even those who had once doubted humans began to speak of them with respect. But peace did not last long. The rebels had been angered by their failure. They believed the empire was weak, and they wanted to strike at its heart again. This time they would not be satisfied with raiding the city. They planned to bring down the palace itself, to tear away the pride of the Arkans and show the galaxy that the empire could no longer protect its throne. The attack came on a moonless night. The palace guards were tired, their ranks thin, many still recovering from the last battle. The rebels moved with precision, cutting through the outer defenses with explosives and hidden tunnels. Fires erupted in the gardens. Arrows of plasma streaked through the sky. The gates, already weakened, crumbled under the assault. Mira was awakened by the sound of alarms and rushing footsteps. Her chamber doors burst open as her guards called for her to follow them to safety. But the young princess refused to run. She remembered the courage she had seen in Aaron. She remembered his steady eyes when flames surrounded them. She knew she could not hide while her people fought outside. She ordered her guards to take her to the main hall. The palace was chaos. Soldiers in heavy armor struggled against the rebels, but the invaders moved like shadows, striking swiftly then vanishing into smoke. Noble families screamed and fled. Servants tried to carry the young and old to hidden passages, but even those passages soon became unsafe. Aaron was in the city when he saw the flames rising above the palace towers. Without hesitation, he ran toward them. His comrades tried to stop him, warning that the palace was the most dangerous place, but he ignored them. He had made his choice long ago. Armor or no armor, he would stand where he was needed most. When he reached the gates, he found them broken. Bodies of guards lay scattered, and the rebels surged inside. Aaron picked up a fallen spear and entered. His steps were steady, though the air was filled with fire and ash. He fought his way through the hall, striking with the weapon, blocking with his arms, using every ounce of strength. Each time he fell, he rose again, refusing to let the rebels push him back. Mira stood in the throne room as the rebels poured in. Her guards fought to protect her, but they were too few. The grand hall that once echoed with laughter and pride now filled with shouts of battle and the clash of steel. Mira's heart pounded. She wanted to stand strong, but fear crept in. Then through the smoke she saw him. Aaron entered, his face marked with dust and blood, his eyes unyielding. He rushed forward, placing himself between Mira and the rebels. He held no shield, yet his stance became a wall. The rebels struck, but he fought them back with desperate strength, every strike fueled by the will to protect. Mira's breath caught. She had mocked this man once, but now he was her shield. Her guards, inspired by his defiance, rallied. Together they pushed the rebels from the throne room, though at great cost. The floor was stained, the banners torn, but the princess still stood. The rebels did not give up. They set fires across the palace, smoke rising to the ceilings. The air grew heavy, hard to breathe. Mira coughed, struggling to keep her balance. Aaron noticed and grabbed her hand. "We must leave," he said, his voice firm but calm. She wanted to argue, to say she could not abandon her home, but the flames convinced her. She followed him as he led her through burning corridors. The palace was falling around them. Pillars cracked, ceilings collapsed, and screams echoed from every corner. Aaron guided Mira through the chaos, shielding her from falling debris, pulling her away from collapsing walls. His body took the blows that would have struck her. Each step was a battle, but he never slowed. At one point, they reached a hall blocked by rubble. Rebels closed in from behind, their weapons raised. Mira's heart sank, believing the end had come, but Aaron refused to surrender. He picked up a broken column, using it as a weapon, swinging it with fierce strength. The rebels faltered, shocked by his unyielding spirit. With a final push, he cleared a path through the rubble and pulled Mira through to safety. They stumbled into the outer courtyard. The once beautiful gardens were now a battlefield. Statues lay broken, fountains spilled water mixed with ash, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Aaron looked around, searching for a way out. Mira saw the determination in his eyes and felt her fear lessen. Even in the heart of destruction, he remained strong. Together they crossed the courtyard, but the rebels attacked again. Aaron fought, with bare hands when weapons failed, striking with fists, kicking with boots, using every move to keep Mira safe. His body bled from cuts and burns, yet he stood tall, refusing to fall. Mira, watching him fight, felt her pride shatter. She realized the truth fully now. His strength was not the kind measured by armor or weapons. It was the strength of a spirit that could not be broken, no matter the fire around it. At last they reached the edge of the palace grounds. Human soldiers and loyal Arkan guards arrived, pushing back the rebels. Aaron collapsed to one knee, his body trembling from exhaustion, but he still kept Mira behind him, shielding her until the threat was gone. When the battle ended, the palace was in ruins. Towers had fallen, Halls were destroyed, and centuries of pride lay in ashes. Yet the princess lived, saved not by walls of stone or armies in armor, but by a single unarmored soldier who had refused to abandon her. That night the survivors gathered in the city. The people mourned the loss of their palace, yet they also spoke of hope. They spoke of the soldier who had carried the princess through fire, who had fought barehanded against enemies, who had stood when all else fell. Aaron had become more than a man. He had become a symbol. Mira stood before the people, her clothes torn, her voice weary, but her heart stronger than before. She raised her head and declared that the empire would rise again. She said they would not forget the courage of the human who had stood by them. Her words carried new weight, for they were no longer words of pride but of respect. As Aaron rested among the wounded, he heard the cheers rising. He did not smile, but in his heart he knew the truth. The palace might have fallen, but something greater had been built that night. Trust, respect, a bond between two races. And it had been forged in the flames of the fall. The morning after the fall of the palace was quiet, though the city itself still hummed with activity. People moved cautiously through the streets, repairing what they could and helping those in need. Smoke lingered over the burned gardens and the scent of ash filled the air. Yet there was a different feeling beneath the rubble, a sense of unity. The people had survived, and in their hearts was the memory of a human who had risked everything to protect them. Aaron walked through the city slowly, his body sore and his uniform torn. Each step reminded him of the battles, the fires, and the chaos of the night before. Yet there was no pride in his mind, only thought for the people around him. He helped lift debris from collapsed streets, guided the wounded to shelters, and offered words of encouragement. Even the smallest gestures carried weight, and he gave them freely. The city's inhabitants watched him with quiet admiration. Farmers, merchants, and children followed him in the streets, carrying small loads or offering simple thanks. Some had once doubted the humans, believing they were fragile and weak, but now they spoke his name with respect. Mothers whispered it to their children as they pointed to him, and elders nodded when he passed. He was no longer simply a soldier. He had become a symbol of courage, of determination, and of human spirit. Mira walked among the citizens as well, though she kept her identity partially hidden beneath a simple cloak. Her eyes were drawn constantly to Aaron. She had spent days observing him, seeing how he treated everyone equally, no matter their station or race. Unlike the nobles of her court, he did not speak to assert power. He acted to protect, to serve, and to inspire. For the first time, Mira felt a deep respect for humans. They were not creatures who relied on machines or armor. They carried strength in ways that could not be measured by steel or weapons. And among them, Aaron was extraordinary. He had shown bravery when the palace burned, endurance when he was wounded, and care when he could have focused only on survival. The emperor summoned Mira to the remains of the throne room. Though the hall had been heavily damaged, he stood among the ruins with dignity. Listening to the reports of the battle and the recovery efforts, Mira approached him quietly. She spoke of Aaron and the people he had helped, describing the courage she had witnessed. Her words were careful, her voice steady. She did not boast or exaggerate. She spoke only the truth. The emperor nodded slowly. "I have heard of him," he said. "His actions have changed the way many see your people. Perhaps it is time we consider what strength truly means." His eyes, wise and thoughtful, lingered on Mira. Not every battle is won with weapons. Some are won with courage, with heart, and with the will to protect others. This soldier has taught us that lesson. Meanwhile, Aaron moved through the streets to help where he could. He did not know the princess was watching. He had no desire for recognition, and he did not seek reward. Yet everywhere he went, people whispered his name. They carried stories of his bravery to other districts, spreading hope in the hearts of citizens who had feared the empire's collapse. One day, Mira approached him directly. She removed her cloak and revealed herself as the princess. Aaron stopped immediately, bowing slightly out of respect, though his mind remained calm. He had faced death, destruction, and chaos. This meeting, though unexpected, did not startle him. "You saved the palace," Mira said softly, her eyes full of honesty. "You saved my life and the lives of countless others. I mocked you once, and I was wrong. Humans are not weak. You are strong beyond what I could have imagined." Aaron nodded once, simple and calm. "I only did what I could," he said. "I could not leave people to suffer when help was needed. Armor does not make someone strong. The will to act does." Mira felt a warmth in her chest she had never felt before. She realized that respect was earned through action, not by title or appearance. The human soldier had walked away from ridicule and shown her and the entire empire the meaning of true strength. Over the next weeks, Aaron continued his work. He trained soldiers not in weapons or armor but in strategy, observation, and teamwork. He taught people to rely on their minds, their instincts, and their courage. Slowly, the city began to recover. Markets reopened, homes were rebuilt, and families began to live without fear. The bond between humans and Arcans grew stronger, strengthened by trust and shared experiences rather than treaties alone. Mira spent more time with Iran, learning from him as he had taught others. She saw how he remained humble despite his achievements. Even when the emperor offered him honors and awards, he refused them politely, saying his reward was seeing people safe and thriving. His character, more than any action, inspired everyone who met him. At the grand assembly held to recognize the efforts of the defenders, Mira stood at the center and spoke to the empire. She told the people of the courage she had witnessed, the bravery of humans, and the strength of spirit that transcended armor or weapons. The citizens listened in awe. Even the nobles, who had once mocked the human soldier, could not ignore the truth. They had seen the results of his actions. When Aaron stepped forward, there was no grand fanfare. He did not demand recognition, but the people cheered not for glory but for the example he had set. Children ran to shake his hand and elders bowed with respect. Mira stood beside him, her eyes full of gratitude and admiration. The princess and the soldier, once divided by species and culture, now shared a bond forged through courage and integrity. The empire began to change in ways that no one could have predicted. Humans were no longer seen as fragile outsiders. Their contributions, wisdom, and bravery became part of the stories told throughout the cities. The soldiers of Earth became allies not only in battle but in peace, their guidance sought in times of need. And through it all, Aaron remained humble, walking among the people as he always had, showing that true strength was quiet, patient, and relentless in the face of challenge. Mira finally understood what her father had meant. True leadership was not only about power or command. It was about courage, empathy, and the ability to inspire others. Aaron had demonstrated all of these qualities. Through his actions, he had changed the hearts of an empire, showing them that strength came not from armor, weapons, or titles, but from character. The palace, though scarred, began to rebuild. Towers rose, walls were repaired, and gardens bloomed again. The city healed not only physically but in spirit. Trust between humans and Arcans grew into friendship. Where there had once been fear and ridicule, there was now respect and cooperation. And Aaron, the human soldier who had once walked away from ridicule, continued his work. He trained, guided, and protected. He spoke softly, acted decisively, and inspired countless lives. His legend was not written in books or songs, but in the hearts of the people who had seen his courage firsthand. Mira often walked beside him, learning from his example. She had once thought humans were fragile and weak, but now she knew better. They were strong in ways she had never imagined. Aaron had shown her and the entire empire the true weight of respect. At last, the sun rose over the city, golden light reflecting off repaired towers and clean streets. Children laughed in the squares. Merchants sold their goods openly, and soldiers stood ready but not in fear. The empire had survived the trial of fire, and its people had learned a lesson that would not be forgotten. Aaron looked out over the city, his eyes calm, his body weary, but his spirit unbroken. Mira stood beside him, silent but proud. Together they had faced the greatest danger the empire had seen in decades. Together they had shown that courage, determination, and the will to protect others could shape the future more than any weapon ever could. And so, the story of the unarmored human soldier became a lasting symbol, a story of hope, courage, and the power of the human spirit. A story that reminded the Arcans and the galaxy that true strength was never in the armor won war, but in the heart that refused to break.